What would you do if the love of your life betrayed you within days of promising forever? Imagine carrying the weight of that betrayal silently, smiling through the pain, and biding your time, not for forgiveness, but for the perfect moment to strike back. The day was perfect. Every detail had been carefully planned, the flowers, the music, the vows that promised forever. To everyone watching, it was the start of a beautiful union, a future filled with love, trust, and happiness. They stood side by side, hand in hand, surrounded by family and friends who believed in their love as much as they did. But perfection is a fragile thing. Sometimes, it's shattered by a single act. Sometimes, it's not shattered at all, but quietly unraveled, thread by thread, until there's nothing left but a hollow reflection of what once was. 3 days later, something happened. Something no one could have anticipated. And yet, the reaction to that event wasn't anger. It wasn't tears or shouting. Instead, there was a smile, an embrace, and a promise of forgiveness. But forgiveness doesn't always mean letting go. What followed was the picture of normalcy. A home filled with laughter, a growing family, and the kind of life that others envied. But some wounds don't heal, and some promises aren't meant to be kept. Beneath the surface, a plan began to take shape, one built on patience, precision, and the quiet determination to make things right, no matter the cost. This is not a story of chance. It is a story of choices. Of trust that was broken, and a revenge so carefully constructed that it would change everything. Nothing could have prepared them for what was coming. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't just shocking, it was catastrophic. Stay with me. This is a tale of betrayal, retribution, and the devastating consequences of trusting the wrong people. What happened 3 days after the wedding was only the beginning. Kamaya Holloway's story began in a modest but tight-knit community, where resilience wasn't just a virtue, it was a necessity. Growing up in a single-parent household, Kamaya quickly became a second mother to her younger sister, Alea. Their mother worked tirelessly to keep the family afloat, and Kamaya took on the responsibility of nurturing and protecting her sibling with fierce devotion. From a young age, Kamaya demonstrated qualities that set her apart: intelligence, drive, and an unshakable moral compass. While others in her neighborhood dreamed of escaping their circumstances, Kamaya dreamed of building something lasting, a family grounded in trust, loyalty, and unyielding love. As she entered adulthood, Kamaya's determination paid off. She pursued a career as an event planner, starting with small local celebrations and eventually gaining a reputation for creating breathtaking, unforgettable moments. Her ability to juggle countless details while maintaining her signature calm demeanor earned her admiration from clients and peers alike. But beneath the surface of her success was a woman deeply rooted in the values she cherished, family above all else. Kamaya was a woman of compassion, a natural nurturer who poured her heart into those she loved. But there was another side to her, one rarely seen. Kamaya had an unyielding sense of justice, a trait born from years of protecting her family. To betray her was to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. Jason Whitaker, or Jace, as everyone called him, was the embodiment of charm. From his youth, he learned how to captivate a room with his quick wit and confident smile. Born into a well-to-do family, Jace had the advantages that Kamaya never did, but he lacked the emotional grounding that came with them. Growing up in a world where image was everything, Jace mastered the art of presenting himself as the man everyone wanted him to be. His good looks and magnetic personality opened doors, first in school and later in his career as a corporate executive. Jace excelled at selling dreams, whether it was closing a business deal or convincing someone they were the center of his world. But Jace's charisma masked a darker truth. Beneath the surface was a man who prioritized his desires above all else, even when it came at the expense of others. His relationships often became transactional, tools to further his ambitions or satisfy his fleeting needs. To most, he appeared affable and generous, but those closest to him knew that Jace's loyalty could be a fragile thing. Meeting Kamaya seemed to change Jace. Her strength and integrity were qualities he admired, even if he didn't fully understand them. To him, Kamaya was a grounding force, someone who could help him build the life he wanted to project to the world. But even in their happiest moments, Jace's selfish tendencies lurked in the background, threatening to unravel everything. Alea Holloway was the spark to Kamaya's steady flame. Where Kamaya was thoughtful and measured, Alea was vibrant and impulsive, often diving headfirst into situations without considering the consequences. The two sisters were close, bound by shared struggles in their early years, but their differences sometimes created tension. As the youngest in the family, Alea enjoyed freedoms Kamaya never had. While Kamaya took on responsibilities, Alea embraced a carefree approach to life. She worked various retail jobs, none of which seemed to hold her interest for long, and she often relied on Kamaya for financial and emotional support. Despite her free-spirited nature, Alea idolized her older sister, even as she sometimes resented living in Kamaya's shadow. Alea was a magnetic presence, much like Jace. She had an easy charm that drew people to her, though her impulsivity often led to trouble. She loved fiercely but without the foresight Kamaya possessed, making her vulnerable to both her own mistakes and the manipulations of others. To Kamaya, Alea was more than a sister, she was family, someone to be protected and cherished no matter the cost. But as they grew older, the lines between loyalty and obligation began to blur. Alea's decisions often left Kamaya cleaning up the mess, and while Kamaya never voiced her frustration, it was there, lingering beneath the surface. The bond between the sisters was unbreakable, but bonds can be tested. And when Jace came into their lives, Alea's carefree nature collided with Kamaya's dreams of loyalty and trust in a way that would change all their lives forever. The stage is set with these three intertwined lives: Kamaya, the devoted wife with a fierce sense of justice; Jace, the charming husband whose selfishness knows no bounds; and Alea, the younger sister torn between love and impulsive mistakes. Their stories are about to collide in ways none of them could have predicted, leaving a trail of heartbreak, betrayal, and consequences no one could escape. Kamaya Holloway and Jason Whitaker's love story began like a dream. They met during a charity gala where Kamaya was the lead event planner, orchestrating every detail with her signature precision. Jace, ever the charmer, was a guest of honor, delivering a speech on behalf of his company. As he spoke, his confident tone and engaging smile caught Kamaya's attention, though she dismissed it as nothing more than professional admiration. But fate seemed determined to intertwine their lives. Later that evening, Jace approached Kamaya, complimenting her on the event's flawless execution. Their conversation started with pleasantries but quickly shifted into something deeper. They talked about their ambitions, their upbringings, and their visions for the future. For the first time, Kamaya felt like someone saw her not just for her accomplishments but for who she truly was. Their connection grew rapidly. Jace's magnetic charm paired with Kamaya's grounded determination made them an enviable couple. They balanced each other, her stability anchored his ambition, and his charisma added color to her structured world. Over the next 2 years, their relationship blossomed. Jace's public displays of affection and Kamaya's quiet devotion created a dynamic that seemed unshakable. When Jace proposed on a moonlit evening, surrounded by family and friends, Kamaya said yes without hesitation. To her, he was everything she had ever wanted: a partner, a protector, and someone she could trust unconditionally. Their wedding day was nothing short of magical. The venue, a sprawling garden estate, was adorned with cascading flowers and shades of soft pink and ivory. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family gathered to witness their union. Kamaya, in her intricately beaded gown, looked radiant as she walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Jace. He stood waiting, his expression filled with admiration and what seemed like genuine love. As they exchanged vows, their voices carried the weight of promises that felt eternal. Kamaya spoke of loyalty and partnership, her words reflecting her deepest values. Jace, in turn, vowed to honor and cherish her, his voice steady and convincing. Alea, Kamaya's younger sister, stood nearby as the maid of honor, her smile bright and her demeanor carefree. To Kamaya, having Alea by her side was the perfect way to start this new chapter of her life. When the ceremony ended, the celebrations began. Laughter echoed through the garden as guests toasted to the happy couple. Kamaya and Jace danced under a canopy of twinkling lights, their love on full display for everyone to see. It was a day of joy and hope, a day that felt like the beginning of forever. But forever lasted only 3 days. The honeymoon phase, both literal and figurative, came to a crashing halt when Kamaya walked into the guest house on her family's property. She had gone to retrieve something Jace had forgotten, a small errand she hadn't thought twice about. What she found instead shattered her. In a moment that would replay in her mind for years, Kamaya saw her husband and her younger sister, Alea, in an intimate embrace. At first, her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. She stood frozen, the world around her collapsing into silence. The laughter and warmth of their wedding day felt like a distant memory. Jace and Alea turned toward her, their faces a mixture of guilt and panic. The weight of what they had done was written all over them. Kamaya's voice, trembling with disbelief, cut through the tension. "What are you doing?" Jace stumbled over his words, his usual charm nowhere to be found. "Kamaya, it's not what it looks like," he began, but the words felt empty. Alea, tearful and ashamed, begged for forgiveness, swearing it had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment. Kamaya listened in silence, her composure and armor against the chaos swirling inside her. She didn't cry or scream. Instead, she stared at them both, her gaze unwavering. Jace and Alea fell to their knees, pleading for her understanding, their voices a cacophony of apologies and excuses. They promised it would never happen again, that they would do anything to make it right. Finally, Kamaya spoke. Her tone was calm, almost unnervingly so. "I forgive you," she said, her words as measured as her movements when she turned and walked away. To Jace and Alea, her response was a relief. They believed her forgiveness was genuine, that their indiscretion would fade into the past. But what they didn't see was the fire that had been ignited within Kamaya, a fire that would smolder quietly, waiting for the right moment to burn everything down. From the outside, Kamaya's life returned to normal. She continued her role as the dutiful wife and the supportive sister, her smile unwavering. She cooked meals, attended family gatherings, and even managed to laugh at Jace's jokes during dinner. But there were small, almost imperceptible changes, shifts that only she noticed. She began to keep a journal, a place to document her thoughts, her plans, and the moments that would lead to something much larger than Jace or Alea could ever anticipate. Kamaya's forgiveness wasn't a surrender. It was a strategy. 3 days after the wedding, the foundation of Kamaya's life had been shattered. What Jace and Alea didn't realize was that Kamaya wasn't the type to let betrayal go unanswered. What they had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a challenge. And Kamaya Holloway never walked away from a challenge. The betrayal may have been the beginning, but it was far from the end. What Kamaya chose to do next would prove that sometimes, the most dangerous storms are the ones that gather strength in silence. Life moved forward, or at least that's how it appeared. The once shattered pieces of Kamaya Holloway's world seemed to fit together again, forming a picture-perfect family life. If anyone outside their home noticed cracks, they didn't mention them. Kamaya's demeanor remained composed, her presence as nurturing as ever, and her role as a wife and mother unwavering. For Jace, it was a return to normalcy. For Kamaya, it was something entirely different. 3 years passed, and in those years, Kamaya built a family with Jace, 3 children, each adding to the illusion of happiness. The eldest, Kylon, was a bright and curious boy who adored his mother and looked up to his father. Middle child Brielle, always with a book in her hand, shared Kamaya's quiet wisdom and a natural sense of empathy. And the youngest, Zarya, a bubbly toddler with a radiant smile, became the light of their lives. Kamaya was a devoted mother. She spent her days nurturing her children, ensuring their lives were filled with love and stability. She read bedtime stories, packed lunches, and hosted birthday parties that were the envy of the neighborhood. To an outsider, she seemed like the epitome of grace, juggling the demands of motherhood and marriage with ease. Jace, too, played his part. He reveled in fatherhood, teaching Kylon to ride a bike, encouraging Brielle's budding interest in science, and doting on little Zarya, who had him wrapped around her tiny finger. The family dinners, the weekend outings, the laughter that filled their home, it all looked so real. And for Jace, it was. Kamaya's forgiveness had been a gift Jace didn't think he deserved. He had expected anger, maybe even separation, but instead, she stayed. She welcomed him back into her heart and home, or so he believed. Her grace, her willingness to move forward, became a source of admiration for him. He trusted her now more than ever, convinced that the bonds of their marriage were stronger for having survived the storm. From Jace's vantage point, life couldn't have been better. His career flourished during these years, each success building on the last. Promotions came with ease, and his colleagues often remarked on how lucky he was to have such a supportive family. Jace wore their praise like a badge of honor, crediting Kamaya for being the backbone of his success. At home, Jace believed they had rebuilt what had been broken. Kamaya's calm and affectionate demeanor reassured him that the pain of the past was behind them. He had no reason to doubt her. After all, she smiled at him the way she always had, greeted him at the door after long days, and spoke to him with the same warmth that first drew him to her. If anything, Jace felt their connection had deepened. The betrayal that could have torn them apart seemed, in his eyes, to have made them stronger. Jace's confidence in their relationship allowed him to focus on his career with renewed energy. His upward trajectory brought financial stability and the kind of lifestyle he had always envisioned. Family vacations to scenic destinations, private schools for the kids, and a beautiful home that seemed to radiate success. Jace felt he had it all. He believed he had worked hard to earn his happiness and that Kamaya shared in his gratitude for the life they had built. The passage of time only reinforced Jace's trust in Kamaya. He often reflected on how lucky he was to have a wife who could look past his flaws, forgive his mistakes, and continue to love him. He didn't see the small shifts in her expressions, the moments when her smile seemed more deliberate than genuine. He didn't notice the way she lingered over family photos or the journal she kept tucked away in their bedroom. Jace trusted Kamaya completely, and it never occurred to him to question her. From the outside, the Whitaker family was enviable. Their neighbors saw them as the ideal couple, raising 3 beautiful children in a home filled with love and laughter. Friends marveled at Kamaya's ability to manage her family with such grace and at Jace's professional success. They were often the first couple invited to social events, the ones whose Christmas cards adorned refrigerators year after year. Even Alea, who remained in Kamaya's life, believed the past had been buried. Kamaya's interactions with her younger sister were warm, even kind. She included Alea in family gatherings, invited her to birthday parties, and often offered her advice and support. To Alea, this was evidence of Kamaya's incredible capacity for forgiveness. The guilt she had carried after the betrayal seemed to lessen with time, thanks to Kamaya's unwavering acceptance. But perfection is often a mirage. While Jace celebrated his victories and Kamaya nurtured her family, something deeper was at play. Kamaya had built a life that appeared flawless, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she needed the facade to execute her plan. Each moment of kindness, each act of love, was calculated. Her resolve hadn't wavered, it had grown stronger with every passing day. Kamaya's revenge wasn't rushed. It was patient and deliberate. She didn't need to shout or rage. Instead, she waited, watching as Jace let his guard down, as he leaned into the comfort of their life together. The love she showed her children was real, but the love she displayed for Jace was something entirely different. It was a mask, one she wore effortlessly as she prepared for the day when the truth would no longer be hidden. The calm before the storm stretched on, long enough for Jace to believe they had weathered the worst of it. But storms don't announce their arrival, they simply strike. And when this storm finally arrived, it would devastate everything Jace thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and his family. What he didn't realize was that Kamaya had been preparing for this moment all along. It began as a minor concern. Zarya, the youngest of Kamaya and Jace's 3 children, had always been the baby of the family, the bright light that brought smiles to everyone around her. Her infectious laughter and boundless energy made her the heart of the household. But on this day, she was quieter, clinging to Kamaya and refusing to play. Something was wrong. Zarya, usually so full of life, seemed uncharacteristically quiet. She clung to Kamaya, her small frame trembling with exhaustion, and her normally bright eyes seemed dulled by an unseen weight. At first, Kamaya thought it was just a cold, nothing more than the usual childhood ailments. But as Zarya's condition worsened, Kamaya and Jace rushed her to the hospital, their hearts heavy with worry. In the sterile, overwhelming environment of the emergency room, tests were conducted to uncover the cause of Zarya's weakness. The doctors moved with precision, their faces calm but serious. Hours passed before they returned with answers that no one in the family expected. Zarya was severely anemic and required a blood transfusion. While processing this, Kamaya and Jace received another piece of news, something that left them stunned. Zarya's test results showed she carried the AS genotype, a trait indicating sickle cell. It wasn't the anemia that shocked Jace, it was the impossibility of the genotype. Both he and Kamaya were AA, a pairing that could not produce a child with AS. The moment the doctor explained this, Jace felt the ground shift beneath him. His thoughts raced as he replayed their shared medical histories, the confirmation of their genotypes before marriage. He tried to focus on Zarya's immediate needs, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Back at home, Jace couldn't shake the questions that had taken hold of him. Every logical explanation he considered only seemed to unravel under scrutiny. Was the hospital wrong? Was there an error in the test? Or was there something far more personal and devastating at play? He avoided voicing these thoughts to Kamaya, afraid of what they might mean, but inside, his suspicions grew louder. During a late-night conversation with a trusted friend, Jace finally shared his fears. The friend listened quietly before suggesting what Jace had been too hesitant to consider. If you're this unsure, get a DNA test. You need answers, even if they're not the ones you want. Initially, Jace resisted the idea. He felt guilty even entertaining the possibility. Kamaya had been nothing but loving, and Zarya was their child in every way that mattered. But the questions refused to leave him, and after days of wrestling with his conscience, he decided to proceed with the test. The results came back sooner than he expected, and when he opened the envelope, his entire world fell apart. The DNA test confirmed that Jace was not Zarya's biological father. He stared at the results, the words burning into his mind. Every moment he had spent cradling her as a baby, every laugh they had shared, all of it felt like a cruel lie. Desperate to understand the full scope of the betrayal, Jace decided to test his two older children, Kylon and Brielle, without telling Kamaya. The guilt of keeping the secret weighed on him, but he needed to know the truth. Days later, the results for Kylon and Brielle arrived, and they confirmed his deepest fear: he was not their biological father either. Jace felt his entire life unravel. He had spent years building a family he believed was his, only to discover that none of his children shared his blood. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it tore at the foundation of everything he thought he knew about his marriage and his role as a father. Every memory Jace replayed in his mind, every birthday party, every bedtime story, every hug, felt tainted. He couldn't reconcile the love he felt for the children with the knowledge that they weren't biologically his. And Kamaya, his wife, the woman he had trusted above all others, had kept this secret from him. It wasn't just the betrayal of an affair, it was the deliberate decision to let him believe in a lie for years. Jace's grief quickly gave way to anger, and his thoughts turned toward confrontation. But as he sat alone in the quiet of their home, he wondered, was Kamaya even capable of regret? Or had this all been part of a plan he was never meant to uncover? The house was eerily quiet that evening. Jace had spent the entire day working up the courage to confront Kamaya. His mind was a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, confusion, but beneath it all, there was a lingering need for answers. He sat at the dining table, staring at the DNA test results laid out before him. The stark black and white text seemed to scream at him, mocking every happy memory he had built with his family. Kamaya walked into the room, her steps soft but deliberate. She immediately noticed his tense posture and the papers on the table. Her expression remained composed, as if she already knew what was coming. Jace looked up at her, his eyes filled with hurt and fury. "Kamaya," he began, his voice low but trembling. "I need you to explain this." He slid the test results across the table toward her, his hands trembling with barely controlled rage. Kamaya picked up the papers and glanced at them. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she placed the papers back on the table with a calmness that only fueled Jace's anger. "What do you want me to say, Jace?" she asked, her tone measured. Jace's fists clenched as he rose from his chair. "Don't do this, Kamaya. Don't act like this is nothing. These results," he jabbed a finger at the papers, "prove that Zarya, Kylon, and Brielle aren't mine. Not one of them. How is that even possible? You've lied to me for years. I need the truth. Now." Kamaya folded her arms, leaning against the edge of the table. Her expression shifted, the warmth she had always shown him replaced by a cold, unyielding stare. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice quiet but sharp. "Fine. You're right. None of them are yours. But do you really want to know why?" Jace's breath caught in his throat. The woman standing before him wasn't the Kamaya he thought he knew. There was no remorse in her eyes, no regret in her voice, only a calculated calm that sent a chill down his spine. "This," Kamaya said, gesturing to the papers, "is what betrayal feels like. This is what it feels like to have the life you built, the promises you believed in, torn apart. Do you remember what you did, Jace? Do you remember 3 days after our wedding, when I walked in on you and my sister?" Jace froze, the color draining from his face. The memory hit him like a freight train. He had convinced himself that they had moved past that mistake, that Kamaya's forgiveness had been genuine. "That was years ago," he stammered. I thought we worked through that. You forgave me." Kamaya let out a bitter laugh, the sound devoid of humor. "Forgave you? No, Jace. I didn't forgive you. I survived you. I smiled through it, raised our children, and pretended everything was fine because I wanted you to feel safe. I wanted you to think you had gotten away with it. And while you were living your perfect little life, I was planning this." Jace stared at her, his heart pounding. "You planned this? You deliberately brought children into this marriage knowing they weren't mine?" Kamaya stepped closer, her voice steady and unyielding. "Yes. Because every time you looked at them, every time you called them yours, I wanted you to remember what you did to me. I wanted you to feel the weight of betrayal, the same way I did when you turned to Alea. And don't pretend it was just once. I know it didn't stop after the wedding." Jace's jaw tightened, his hands trembling at his sides. "You knew? All this time, you knew?" Kamaya nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Of course I knew. Did you really think Alea could keep a secret like that from me? I knew everything, Jace. I knew about the meetings, the excuses, the lies. And I made a choice. I could have left you, but I didn't. I stayed. For this." Her words sliced through him like a blade. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and his family had been a carefully constructed lie. And Kamaya stood before him, unapologetic, even proud of what she had done. The air between them crackled with tension as Jace's anger reached its breaking point. He took a step toward her, his voice shaking with rage. "You think this makes us even? You think this erases what you've done? You destroyed our family, Kamaya. You used me." Kamaya's calm exterior didn't falter. "I didn't destroy anything, Jace. You did that the moment you chose her over me." Something inside Jace snapped. He lunged toward Kamaya, his hands grabbing her shoulders as his fury spilled over. "You don't get to do this to me," he shouted, shaking her. "You don't get to play the victim while you've been lying to me for years." Kamaya struggled against him, but his grip tightened. Her calm demeanor finally cracked, replaced by fear as Jace's rage consumed him. "Let go of me, Jace," she said, her voice rising, but he wasn't listening. In his blind anger, Jace pushed her backward. Kamaya stumbled, hitting the edge of the table before falling to the floor. The impact was brutal, her head striking the corner with a sickening thud. She lay still, her breathing shallow as blood began to pool beneath her. The house, once filled with laughter and the pitter-patter of small feet, now echoed with screams and chaos. Kylon, standing frozen at the top of the stairs, finally found his voice. "Mommy," he cried out, his small frame trembling. His younger siblings, Brielle and Zarya, peeked out from their bedroom, fear etched across their faces as they heard the crash and saw their father kneeling over their mother's motionless body. Kylon raced down the stairs, his heart pounding. He reached his mother's side, tugging on her arm, tears streaming down his face. "Mommy, wake up. Please," he begged. But Kamaya didn't respond. Blood seeped from her head wound, staining the floor beneath her. Jace, his hands shaking and his face pale, whispered, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean for this to happen." The children's cries broke through Jace's haze, and he grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's voice guided him through the call as he explained the situation. "My wife, she's hurt. There was an argument, and I don't know if she's breathing. Please, send someone fast." As they waited for the paramedics, Kylon clung to his mother, his small hands trying to stop the bleeding. Brielle held Zarya tightly, whispering soothing words as much for herself as for her baby sister. The sound of sirens grew louder, and moments later, paramedics burst through the door, quickly assessing Kamaya's condition. "She's critical," one of them said, their movements swift but grim. They placed Kamaya on a stretcher and rushed her toward the ambulance. Jace followed, his hands still stained with blood, muttering incoherent apologies under his breath. He tried to climb into the ambulance, but a firm hand stopped him. "You're staying here," the paramedic said. "The police will want to speak with you." Jace watched helplessly as the ambulance sped away, its lights flashing in the night. He stood rooted to the spot, guilt and panic consuming him. Minutes passed like hours until a police cruiser pulled up, and two officers stepped out. "Mr. Whitaker," one asked, their tone professional but cold. "We need to ask you some questions about what happened here tonight." Jace barely heard them. His mind was racing, replaying every moment of the confrontation. "It was an accident," he stammered. "I didn't mean to hurt her." The officers exchanged glances before placing him in handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," one of them began, their words blending into the background noise of Jace's spiraling thoughts. As he was led to the cruiser, he looked back at his home, where his children were being comforted by a neighbor who had rushed over after hearing the commotion. En route to the hospital, Kamaya's condition deteriorated rapidly. The injuries she had sustained were too severe, and despite the paramedics' best efforts, she died on the way. When the news reached the police station, Jace broke down completely. The weight of what he had done was unbearable. The charge against him escalated from assault to murder. The news of Kamaya's death spread quickly, reaching both the Holloway and Whitaker families within hours. The Holloways were devastated. For Alea, the weight of guilt was crushing. The role she had played in her sister's pain was undeniable, and now that pain had culminated in an unimaginable tragedy. She couldn't escape the whispers, the judgment of others who knew her involvement. The humiliation was relentless, but it paled in comparison to the sorrow of knowing her actions had contributed to her sister's death. Alea spent days replaying every moment in her mind, questioning why she had allowed herself to betray Kamaya in the first place. She tried to visit her nieces and nephew, but they didn't want to see her. Kylon, in particular, blamed her for everything, his young mind connecting the dots between his parents' argument and the betrayal he had overheard whispered about. "You hurt Mommy," he said through tears, slamming the door in her face. Meanwhile, Jace's family faced their own reckoning. The Whitakers had always been proud of their son's achievements, his charm, and his seemingly perfect life. But now, their pride was overshadowed by shame. Jace's parents struggled to reconcile the son they knew with the man who now stood accused of murder. His mother, a soft-spoken woman who had always doted on him, spent her days in tears, refusing to speak to anyone. His father, stoic but visibly shaken, tried to manage legal proceedings, but even he couldn't mask the despair in his voice when he spoke. The Whitaker name, once associated with success and respectability, was now linked to scandal and tragedy. Friends distanced themselves, and colleagues who once admired Jace now avoided mentioning him altogether. The weight of public scrutiny was suffocating, but for Jace's parents, the personal loss was far worse. They had lost the son they thought they knew, and they couldn't comprehend how their family had unraveled so completely. The Holloway children, too young to fully understand the depth of what had happened, bore the scars of that night. Kylon, now the oldest in the house, felt the burden of protecting his siblings. He refused to talk about his father, only acknowledging him with anger when pressed. Brielle, once bright and curious, withdrew into herself, finding solace in books but avoiding conversations about her parents. And Zarya, too young to grasp the gravity of the situation, often asked, "When is Mommy coming back?" A question that broke the hearts of everyone who heard it. Kamaya's death left a void that could never be filled. The betrayal, the violence, and the loss had shattered the lives of everyone involved. And as Jace sat alone in his prison cell, awaiting trial, he was left with only his thoughts. Thoughts of the family he had loved, the mistakes he had made, and the woman he had lost forever. The tragedy had unfolded, leaving devastation in its wake. But the ripple effects would continue for years to come, as the people who once shared a life together struggled to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal and loss. The courtroom was packed with curious spectators, their attention fixed on the man sitting at the defendant's table, Jason Whitaker. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a gaunt, hollow look. The weight of the trial, the accusations, and the reality of Kamaya's death had taken its toll. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Jace. They described him as a man consumed by rage, incapable of controlling his emotions, and responsible for the tragic death of his wife. They detailed the events leading to that fateful night, including Kamaya's injuries and the desperate 911 call. The evidence was compelling, the children's tearful accounts of witnessing the aftermath, the medical reports of Kamaya's fatal injuries, and Jace's own frantic statements to the police. Each piece of evidence built upon the prosecution's narrative that this was no mere accident, it was a violent outburst that ended in tragedy. Kamaya's family took the stand, their grief evident in every word. Her mother spoke through tears, describing Kamaya as a devoted mother and a loving sister who had always put others before herself. She didn't deserve this, her mother said, her voice breaking. Her life was taken from her by someone who claimed to love her. Then came Alea. Her testimony was a whirlwind of guilt and sorrow. She confessed to her affair with Jace, revealing details that shocked even those who thought they knew the full story. "I was selfish," Alea admitted. "I made choices that hurt my sister, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But Jace, he didn't just betray her. He took her from us." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Alea's words hung in the air. The revelation of the affair was a turning point, adding another layer of betrayal to an already tragic case. For Kamaya's family, it was a bitter validation of the pain she had endured silently for years. The defense, in contrast, argued that Jace's actions were not premeditated. His lawyer emphasized the years of strain in the marriage, the discovery of the DNA results, and the emotional toll it had taken on him. "My client was a man pushed to the edge," the defense attorney said. "He made a terrible mistake in the heat of the moment, but he is not a cold-blooded killer." Jace himself took the stand, his voice trembling as he recounted his version of events. He admitted to the argument and the confrontation but insisted he never intended to harm Kamaya. "I loved her," he said, his voice cracking. "No matter what happened between us, I never wanted this. I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to take her life." Despite his words, the jury saw through his plea. The prosecution's evidence was too strong, the testimonies too damning. Kamaya's death wasn't just an accident, it was the result of Jace's inability to control his rage. After weeks of emotional testimony and legal arguments, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the forepersons stood to deliver the decision. We find the defendant, Jason Whitaker, guilty of manslaughter. Gasps and muffled sobs rippled through the room. Kamaya's family embraced one another, tears streaming down their faces. Jace sat motionless, his head bowed as the weight of the verdict sank in. The judge's sentence was swift but heavy. Jace was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The sentence reflected the seriousness of his actions, though some in the public believed it was too lenient. Was Kamaya's revenge justified? Did Jace's betrayal excuse his rage? For the Holloway family, the trial's conclusion offered little solace. Kamaya was gone, and no verdict could bring her back. Her children, now living with their grandmother, struggled to adjust to life without their mother. Alea, burdened by guilt and public scrutiny, moved away from the city, hoping to find a fresh start. But the weight of her actions followed her, a constant reminder of the role she played in her sister's death. She tried to make amends by supporting her nieces and nephew from afar, but she knew it would never be enough. Jace, now a prisoner, spent his days reflecting on the choices that led him to this point. The betrayal, the lies, the rage, they all haunted him. The memories of his family, once a source of joy, now served as a painful reminder of everything he had destroyed. In moments of solitude, he wondered if Kamaya had planned for this ending, if her silence in those final moments had been her ultimate act of defiance. The world moved on, but the questions lingered. Could such a tragedy have been avoided? Were Kamaya's actions truly revenge, or were they a cry for justice? And in the end, who bore the greater burden, those who betrayed, or those who sought retribution? The story left scars on everyone it touched, but its lessons were clear. Trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. And the consequences of betrayal can ripple far beyond what anyone might expect. The children, left without their parents, faced an uncertain future. Kylon carried anger, Brielle withdrew into herself, and Zarya's innocent questions about her mother and father broke the hearts of those caring for them. The emotional scars ran deep, shaping a childhood overshadowed by loss and betrayal. Kamaya's actions raised difficult questions. Was her revenge an act of justice or one of destruction? And what of Jace? Could his grief and anger ever excuse the violence that ended her life? The story invites reflection. Was Kamaya's revenge justified? Could Jace's actions ever be forgiven? These are questions without easy answers, leaving us to confront the complexities of love, betrayal, and morality. This tragic tale teaches us the fragility of trust and the far-reaching consequences of betrayal. It reminds us how unresolved pain and unaddressed wounds can lead to devastating outcomes. As you think about Kamaya, Jace, and their children, consider the cost of vengeance and the power of forgiveness. This is not just a story of love lost but of lives forever changed by choices made in anger and sorrow. If you found this story thought-provoking, please like, share, and subscribe for more gripping narratives that make us question what it truly means to be human.